Good morning, I'm Joe Fryer.
And I'm Savannah Sellers. Right now on Morning News Now, taking questions. President Biden wrapping up his first year in the White House with a rare formal news conference, his first one in months. This as the president faces several challenges, from COVID's winter wave to inflation and supply shortages to his push for voting rights legislation. A look ahead at how the president plans to defend his agenda. A new twist in not one but two investigations involving former President Donald Trump. First, breaking overnight, New York's Attorney General announcing significant evidence of fraud in a civil probe into the Trump Organization. While in Washington, some of the former president's closest allies subpoenaed in the investigation into the Capitol insurrection. The latest developments and what's next in both cases. Delayed. Plans for a 5G rollout put off following concerns over its impacts at the airport. We've got the latest information on a deal between carriers and airlines. Plus, what is 5G and how might it affect your next flight? We'll explain the science behind the concerns about the new wireless service. In their own words, hospital workers in New York City overworked, understaffed, and speaking out after 2 years of treating patients during a pandemic.
I feel almost a calling in society to stay in the fight because it really still feels like a war.
More on their experiences working on the front lines in one of America's first major COVID hotspots. And tastes like chicken. Some of the nation's biggest fast food chains now adding vegan options to their menus. A look at how the plant-based boom is changing the way people see a meatless diet. And that story involved me trying one of those sandwiches that really did taste just like chicken.
Which is a compliment.
It is.
Yes.
It was actually delicious. I said, I think I would prefer this. I had a whole ranch sauce. It was great. We'll get to that a little bit later.
Now.
Yeah, exactly. All right, we'll start this morning, though, with the president as he prepares to mark the end of his first year in office.
He's putting a bookend on year one by holding a formal White House press conference, his first in months. President Biden last spoke with reporters at a news conference in Scotland in November, but today will be only the president's second solo domestic presser. The last time he held one at the White House was March 25th, nearly 10 months ago. A lot has changed since then. COVID cases are surging nationwide. Inflation is at a 40-year high. And the president's agenda is in limbo, with his goal of enacting new voting rights legislation expected to fail this week. All this comes on the eve of his second year in office. Back on January 20th, 2021, at his inauguration, the president delivered a message of unity in the same place that rioters had stormed the Capitol just 2 weeks before.
Today, on this January day, my whole soul is in this, bringing America together, uniting our people, uniting our nation.
But what will the president's message be today with a plummeting approval rating and setbacks to his own agenda? NBC News is learning the White House is looking for a reset. NBC News White House correspondent Mike Memoli joins us now with more on this. So, Mike, what is the main message that President Biden will try to deliver today, knowing he's going to be facing some tough questions from the press corps?
Yeah, Joe, this is an opportunity for the White House to have the president begin year two by putting his best foot forward. But because there are a lot of questions he's going to face, and you can expect that while he'll want to talk about the strong jobs numbers during his first year in office, there will be questions about inflation. While he'll want to talk about the successful passage of what he has called a historic infrastructure bill, there will be questions about why he hasn't gotten the rest of his agenda, Build Back Better, voting rights, over the finish line. He'll want to talk about repaired alliances overseas, but we're on the brink of war in Ukraine, and also facing some real tests with Iran and China. But here is how White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki yesterday tried to set the table for the president's remarks today.
We need to build on that. The work is not done. The job is not done. And we are certainly not conveying it as. So our objective, and I think what you'll hear the president talk about tomorrow, is how to build on the foundation we laid in the first year.
And I'm glad you played the remarks from the president's inaugural address, because one of his core promises that he made the American people was to unite the American people. The country, though, as divided as ever. And as we start 2022, I'm going to predict that there will be questions about 2024. The president has repeatedly said he plans to run for re-election, but just about every chance he gets, we get an opportunity to ask the question. We're going to ask him about his own future political plans, even though the focus this year on the midterm elections.
I think the main question is who is going to ask that question. Let's talk about approval ratings. According to Gallup, President Biden's first-year average approval rating was 48.9%. Now, this ranked lower than many other presidents in their first years. It was, though, higher than his predecessor, former President Trump. Of course, right now, his approval is at its lowest point. So after a year filled with multiple setbacks, as you've reported, Mike, he wants to reset. What does that look like in year two?
Yeah, just about everyone in the administration that we've talked to agrees that the president has spent too much time in his first year in office bogged down in Washington and dealing with the sausage making. They want to see him do what they think he does best, talk directly to the American people, maybe get out of Washington to do that. But while there's a broad agreement on what that strategy should be, there's really a lot of still questions about what that execution looks like. And also, we have to say, this is sort of a typical talking point for an administration that is in tough political times, saying that they want to have the president speak more directly to the American people. It also is a campaign year. The president would naturally expect to be out on the campaign trail a lot, trying to boost Democratic candidates. The question, though, is if his approval ratings remain in dangerous territory for an incumbent president, for his party in a midterm year, will Democrats want him in their district? White House officials are telling me the president is being invited to come to talk to lawmakers in their districts to talk about the infrastructure plan, but we'll see what the invitation really looks like as we get closer to those elections.
So, Mike, let's be clear. There have been many accomplishments in this first year, and there have been setbacks. So what do White House officials see as their biggest accomplishment and also their biggest failure of the first year?
I think we saw sort of two in the same time yesterday as we saw this voting rights debate on Capitol Hill, something that we know really is going to go down to defeat. The White House had their infrastructure czar at the White House podium talking to reporters about the infrastructure law. That's obviously what they would see as one of their biggest success stories of this year. Obviously, the big setback on foreign policy was the situation in Afghanistan, the tragic loss of life as the U.S. ended that 20-year war. I think a lot of administration officials would also acknowledge that the promise that the president made to get COVID under control, that July event where the president declared independence from the virus, even though very clearly Omicron is still with us, something that they wish they could take back.
Mike Memoli at the White House with a preview. Mike, thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Now, the federal government's website for those free at-home COVID tests we've been promised is now live. The White House started taking orders on covidtests.gov Monday. That's the website you can head to. Coming online before its official launch today. Testing has been one of the administration's biggest challenges. You might have experienced this yourself, either waiting in a long line at a testing center or having a tough time getting your hands on an at-home rapid test. Let's now bring in NBC News medical contributor Dr. Uche Blackstock. She's also the CEO and founder of Advancing Health Equity.
Dr. Blackstock, good to have you with us. Let's start by getting your reaction to the launch of the COVID test website. We're also learning this morning about a push to distribute a lot of N95 masks. So in your mind, is this all happening too late, or do you think it can still have a big impact?
Good morning, Joe and Savannah. Thank you for having me. This is, I think, a changing point in how this pandemic is managed. I would say better late than never. The fact that these rapid tests and masks will be free and accessible to most Americans is really a key change in how the pandemic has been managed by this White House so far. I'm glad that they've listened to the medical community, the public health community about the importance of giving access to the American public to these tests and these masks. They're critical in keeping communities safe. And so I think this is a good sign. And I hope that we can see more changes like this in the coming months, because I think it will help prepare us for the next surge.
We should note the news that came out of the White House this morning. It is going to send out 400 million masks that are going to be available to help fight Omicron.
Yeah, now let's talk about classrooms, doctor. I mean, they've become this breeding ground for the virus, like anywhere where people are in close contact, and especially in classrooms where a lot of kids can't be vaccinated yet. An online tracker actually shows that more than 6,200 U.S. schools were actively disrupted by Omicron last week. What's your advice to parents who are worried, either way about keeping their kids in school and keeping them safe? Maybe they're too young to get vaccinated, but also the mental health ramifications of them being home.
I know it's a very challenging position for parents like myself to be in. The issue is that schools are not inherently safe. And so I think it's important for parents to be aware of what their schools are offering. Do their schools have mask mandates? Do they keep students in small classrooms cramped together, or do they space them out? Or do they have other ways like air ventilation, air purifiers available to keep it safe? Are they going to use those multiple layers that we know of mitigation that we know are really key to keeping schools safe? I think ultimately it comes up to an individual risk calculation. Do parents feel their kids are safe at school? Do the children have an underlying medical problem? And so while I think it's so critically important to keep schools open and to minimize disruption, we have to make sure we're employing all of those strategies. And then ultimately parents have to make a decision based on what is available at their schools and what and what are their children's specific situation.
Dr. Blackstock, we also want to ask you a viewer question, something we've been doing all week. Mitchell from Maryland writes, I spray a little Lysol on paper towel and gently wipe the inside and outside of the N95 mask. I let it sit for a day or two before using it again. Is that safe? Is it a good or bad practice? What would you say?
Right. So I know people have a lot of questions about how to clean a N95 mask. I would say don't do that. Please don't use Lysol or any other cleaning product on an N95 mask. The best way to clean it is to put it in a paper bag and to set it aside for about 2 to 3 days. Wetting it with water or a cleaning substance can really damage the integrity of the mask and also be a danger to you sort of inhaling that chemical substance. So I would say please don't do that. Just keep it in a paper bag for 2 or 3 days and that should do the job.
Sorry, Mitchell, but at least we got your answer for you.
Exactly.
And that was inventive. I'll give it to him. At least he was trying to clean it.
Right.
Mitchell in Maryland. Thank you for watching. Thank you for asking your question. Dr. Uche Blackstock, thank you for that answer and for joining us as always. And if you have a question for one of our doctors, please let us know. They're ready to answer your questions. Email us at morningnewsnow@NBCUNI.com. We love reading your questions. Thank you to those of you who have sent them in so far. And please do let us know if you want to stay anonymous.
This morning, we are covering a couple big challenges for former President Trump and his inner circle. The House committee investigating the January 6th attack has subpoenaed 4 of Trump's lawyers, including Rudy Giuliani. The committee is accusing them of spreading misinformation and trying to overturn the results of the 2020 election. NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Ali Vitale joins us now. So, Ali, good morning. Walk us through what these subpoenas, what we know about them so far, and what does it tell us about this House investigation and now that they're looking into former President Trump's own legal team?
Yeah, well, Joe, it speaks to another prong of this investigation as we see them come into 2022, trying to tie up the loose ends, trying to get more answers, and eventually enter a more public phase where we're going to see public hearings and more of the information that they've been gathering at this point behind closed doors. What these 4 subpoenas do, and the 4 people who are being subpoenaed here are Rudy Giuliani, as you mentioned, but also Sidney Powell, Jenna Ellis, and Boris Epshteyn. These were many of the people that you saw in the waning days after the election, going around the country, mounting those legal challenges that were then cast out of all of the swing state courts, and then continuing to promote unsupported claims of election fraud. That's exactly why Chairman Benny Thompson says they are subpoenaing these individuals. A part of the statement that Thompson released yesterday says the 4 individuals subpoenaed yesterday advanced unsupported theories about election fraud, pushed efforts to overturn the election results, or were in direct contact with the former president about attempts to stop the counting of electoral votes. One of the things that's going to be really important here is several of the people who were subpoenaed here were at an alleged meeting at the Willard Hotel. There are questions about whether or not the former president was in contact with those people at the hotel, but the point of their conversation during that time was how they could overturn the election results on January 6th and around that time as the electors were supposed to be certified in Congress. That's certainly one of the things the committee is going to try to get at here.
So, Ali, have any of these Trump allies responded to the subpoenas, and what are the odds any of them will cooperate with the committee's investigation?
I love the way you put it that way. What are the odds? Because we know how many of these Trump allies have said that they are not going to cooperate with this committee. At the same time, though, the committee has gotten cooperation from several others. So in this instance, because some of them are very high profile, I'm thinking of people specifically like Rudy Giuliani, we've seen the more high profile people here tend to not cooperate or only cooperate halfway in a way that the committee wasn't necessarily pleased with. It's unclear whether or not that's going to happen, but there's an interesting twist here when you start subpoenaing the lawyers is they can start invoking attorney-client privilege. And Rudy Giuliani, for instance, that's what his lawyer is saying on his behalf to us. Giuliani's lawyer said it implicates executive and attorney-client privileges that belong to former President Trump. He then goes on to say that this is a grandstand theatrical political play because the committee cannot seriously think that they can subpoena 4 lawyers and actually obtain factual information in violation of the attorney-client privilege. That's going to complicate this round of subpoenas just a little bit more, Joe.
And Allie, we also learned yesterday from a CNN report that the House committee has subpoenaed phone records from 2 people in the former president's circle, his son, Eric Trump, and Kimberly Guilfoyle. What more can you tell us about that?
Yeah, and CNN reporting this, NBC News not yet able to confirm, but Eric Trump himself lashing out against the committee and saying that it's a witch hunt and that he has nothing to hide. What this would mark, though, is an escalation of what we're seeing the committee do in regards to the former president's children. In a round of subpoenas that came out in the last few weeks, we did see people like Kimberly Guilfoyle, who is not just an advisor and in the former president's orbit, but also someone who is engaged to one of his other sons, Donald Trump Jr. We saw Guilfoyle and Donald Trump Jr. named in other rounds of subpoenas in the last 2 weeks. It's likely, because all of the other people who were subpoenaed have already been subpoenaed, it's likely that this was the road that this was going to go down. So not necessarily surprising, but I think the one thing left unsaid here is now that we've seen subpoenas out for phone records for Eric Trump and Kimberly Guilfoyle reportedly, the next open question is whether or not that comes to encompass Donald Trump Jr. as well.
Allie Vitale. Allie, thank you so much.
And we've got more news impacting the former president breaking overnight. New York's Attorney General Letitia James is taking aim at the former president and members of his family. A court filing has revealed new details about the civil investigation into the Trump Organization's financial dealings. In a statement Tuesday, you can see here on your screen, James said her probe has uncovered, quote, significant evidence that suggests Donald Trump and the Trump Organization falsely and fraudulently valued multiple assets and misrepresented those values to financial institutions for economic benefit. Her office says she has not yet decided whether the evidence merits legal action. The Trump Organization did not immediately respond to a request for comment from NBC News. We've got NBC News investigations correspondent Tom Winter joining us for more on this. Tom, good morning. So walk us through some of these allegations and findings by the New York Attorney General. I just mentioned she hasn't decided whether this merits legal action, but how serious is this?
Well, it's serious from a civil standpoint, so it's important to remember that this is a civil investigation that's going on parallel to a criminal investigation that's being primarily led by the Manhattan District Attorney now, Alvin Bragg, in an investigation that the AG's office is heavily involved in. So when we look at these allegations from a civil standpoint, they could be potentially serious, and we have a couple to review. Namely, James points out that certain things were misled, such as the size of Trump's triplex, his Trump Tower penthouse. It says in the plans it's just approximately 10,000 square feet. For several years, they said that it was 30,000 square feet. Well, what does that mean? It means that the value was inflated from approximately $100 million to $300 million. How they processed the valuations, failing to use a standard valuation techniques. Now, what I may value something, Savannah, could be different than the way that you value something. But there are certain techniques and methods and processes that you would use so that we could get to some sort of common ground when it comes to valuing properties, as well as the involvement of outside professionals. Were they really outsiders, or do they have some sort of a gain to be made by valuing properties certain ways? I think another key component of this, Savannah, is the IRS component of it, which is, according to Trump's own accountants, easements at Trump National, Los Angeles, and the Seven Springs property in New York resulted in millions of dollars of tax benefits to Trump. So was there some sort of misrepresentation to the IRS that has a federal connotation as well? So certainly a number of things that they're looking at.
And so, Tom, James is seeking a court order that would force Trump, Don Jr., and Ivanka to comply with this investigation. Where could this investigation go next? I mean, does this mean we will see compliance from them?
Right. So the whole reason why we got this filing is because the Trump organization came forward and Trump's attorneys came forward and essentially said, look, you can't go after this testimony. We're in the middle of a criminal investigation. You're trying to get us to talk about this on a civil side. We have real potential criminal liability here. And so either cancel the whole thing altogether, or let's get through the criminal component, and then we'll talk about sitting and speaking with you on the civil side. That's why they got this full-throated response last night. The AG's office believed that they could respond with all of this detail, Savannah. Now it's going to be up to a judge to determine whether or not there's enough here to go forward. Typically in New York State, the the benefit of the doubt goes to the Attorney General for getting this type of testimony. So we'll have to see exactly how the judge will rule.
All right, Tom Winter, as always, thank you so much.
Sure thing.
Now, new this morning, AT&T and Verizon have flipped on their new 5G service nationwide, but it's not a complete rollout. The country's biggest wireless carriers have agreed to temporarily limit 5G around some airports. This deal was reached after airline CEOs and others raised safety concerns about the new 5G signal, potentially causing what they said could be, quote, catastrophic disruptions to airliners' navigation systems. Despite this agreement to limit the launch, this morning, airlines around the world have canceled flights or changed planes out of an abundance of caution. So here's a big, easy question. What is 5G, and what are the specific concerns airlines have? Here's NBC News Now anchor Hallie Jackson with some answers just as this system comes online.
You've seen the commercials.
Hi, Verizon launched the first 5G network.
Cell phone companies offering you incredibly fast internet speeds with the promise of 5G.
It's not complicated. AT&T 5G is fast, reliable, and secure.
The technology is already out there. 5G smartphones have been on the market since 2019, and those faster speeds are already used in more than 40 countries around the world. So here at home, why are the phone companies in a standoff with airlines? It all comes down to the tech. 5G is part of a frequency range from roughly 3.7 to 4.2 gigahertz. Stick with us here. Experts call it the C-band on what's known as the radio frequency spectrum. It's part of the same spectrum that you find AM and FM radio and transportation communications. And that's why the FAA and airlines are sounding the alarm, saying the technology could interfere with a plane's altimeter, an instrument in the cockpit that tells pilots how close a plane is to the ground as it comes into land. Those cockpit altimeters use frequencies from 4.2 to 4.4 gigahertz. The initial 5G rollout will use up to 3.8 gigahertz. The FAA thinks those frequencies are just too close. But that's where a different government agency, the FCC, comes in. They manage these radio frequencies to make sure all of them can coexist, some with even smaller gaps between them. And they say they've already determined the launch of 5G here in the U.S. would be no problem for modern altimeters.
Our thanks to Hallie Jackson for that report. And Verizon and AT&T did not announce which airports would be impacted by the limiting of the new 5G service. Obviously, a lot to follow there.
Let's get a check on your morning news now weather.
Bill Cairns is back with us today. Hi, Bill. Good morning.
Hey, good morning. Great to see you guys. And it happens every year. People in Florida freak out when it gets cold, and they're not really built for it, I guess, is one way to put it. I lived there. I experienced it, and the houses aren't really built for it either. And so yesterday, some people are still wearing shorts, but temperatures dipped into the 50s in Miami, which by 50s is cold by Miami standards. The I-4 corridor from Tampa to Orlando had wind chills in the 30s, and Jacksonville, Florida, dipped down to 31 degrees. So the Florida chill was a big talker, at least in the Sunshine State. Do you want real cold, though? You have to go to the northern plains, and that's where we're taking it this morning. Another blast of winter. This is kind of the peak of winter. End of January, really the first week of February, typically is the coldest that we get, and it's not disappointing. I mean, it is frigid this morning in the northern plains. If you look at Bismarck and Fargo, all those typical cold spots this morning, it's pretty brutal. Negative 30, Bismarck is the leader this morning. International Falls, negative 22. Minneapolis is negative 20, and that cold air is pouring down through Wisconsin, and it's headed for Chicago, Iowa, and even into areas like St. Louis and Kansas City this afternoon. Kansas City only 24 degrees with a wind chill of 9. That's going to be this afternoon's high temperature. So again, this is what you expect in the middle of winter, and we're getting it today. Now, what's going to also happen is with this Arctic front coming down, there's going to be some snow tomorrow morning, guys. It's not a huge ordeal, only 1 to 2 inches, but the timing of it from Kentucky, D.C., Philly, New York City, and Boston is tomorrow morning rush hour. So keep that in mind for your early morning drive.
Oh, all right. Lots going on, Bill. Thank you so much. Great to have you with us. Now to some sad news in the fashion world. Trailblazing fashion journalist Leon Talley has died. Talley's career in fashion journalism spanned 6 decades, including serving as creative director and eventually editor-at-large of Vogue magazine until 2013. Talley's major impacts included bringing more black voices into the fashion industry, both on and off the runway. He also helped advise the Obama family on fashion shortly before former President Obama was elected in 2008. He was 73 years old, and his cause of death has not yet been released.
Coming up on Morning News Now, communication concerns in Tonga following that massive volcanic eruption.
Up next, the latest on repairs to the island nation's only cable, connecting it to the outside world as we get a closer look at the destruction after the break. Welcome back. Authorities are racing to restore communications to the island of Tonga following Saturday's volcanic eruption.
New Zealand's foreign ministry says it could take at least 4 weeks to repair an important undersea cable that was destroyed. At least 3 people have been killed as emergency teams battle to get aid to the island. NBC News correspondent Matt Bradley has the latest.
First images taken in the skies over Tonga revealing vast devastation after a volcanic eruption triggered a massive tsunami, leaving at least 3 dead. But the fear is that number will grow higher once rescue crews can reach the ravaged areas. This once bustling port, now buried in ash and dust. A lush green neighborhood, now just a sea of gray. The island that surrounded the underwater volcano before its eruption, now seemingly gone. The images captured from planes sent by New Zealand and Australia, providing a glimpse of the desperate need on the ground. The ash that now covers the islands creating a dual crisis, contaminating the water supply, leaving thousands with nothing to drink, and blanketing the airport's runways, making it impossible for planes carrying humanitarian aid to land.
60% of the runway has been cleared, and this is done manually. I hear up to 200 volunteers are sweeping the runway in preparation for the supplies to land on Thursday or Friday.
New Zealand's Navy now sending bottled water and other essentials by boat, but those supplies will take days to reach Tonga. The massive eruption over the weekend reportedly causing a tsunami with waves more than 50 feet high. The Tongan government says it began rescue efforts on Sunday, finding some outer islands completely destroyed by its impact. The tight-knit island community already beginning to grieve together.
When somebody else loses a parent, we all feel it. And the same if I was to have any suffering, I'm aware that other islanders, other Pacific people, other Tongans all feel exactly my feeling. That's how close we are.
The full impact of the catastrophic natural disaster still largely unknown. With phone lines and internet access down, Tonga's leader with a glimmer of hope, saying cell and internet service could be back up soon.
Within the next 24 to 48 hours, they may be able to restore some level of service. And what that means for Tongans in Tonga and our diaspora overseas is that we'll be able to be in touch with our loved ones.
But for Tongans around the world, that wait is excruciating as the need for help grows more apparent by the day. Matt Bradley, NBC News.
Let's take a look at what else is making news around the world this morning.
Ali Arouzi is with us from Tehran. Hi, Ali. Good morning.
Good morning, Savannah, Joe. The situation along the Ukrainian border remains incredibly anxious. There are still around 100,000 heavily armed Russian troops amassed there, and things are about to get even more tense now that Russia is sending an unspecified number of troops westward to Belarus for major war games, giving the Russian military a bigger footprint near Ukraine amid fears of an invasion. Authorities in Hong Kong seized a number of hamsters from a pet shop to be euthanized following a COVID outbreak. Anyone who bought a hamster from the pet shop after the 22nd of December has been told to hand over their pet for euthanization. Around 2,000 small mammals linked to the shop are due to be culled. Thousands have signed a petition against the move. And finally, an asteroid 4 times the size of the Empire State Building heading towards Earth may sound like a sci-fi disaster movie, but that's exactly what happened. The asteroid was close to Earth's orbit on Tuesday afternoon, but thankfully was far enough to avoid disaster. And those are your headlines from outer space.
We're all breathing a sigh of relief with that. All right,
yes, thanks to our planetary defense system. All right, now the government website where Americans can order those promised at-home COVID tests is now up and running. We're also hearing from the White House that it's planning the largest deployment of personal protective equipment in U.S. history. NBC News correspondent Heidi Presbella joins us now from Washington to break it all down. Hey, Heidi, good morning. So let's start with this website. Now, the White House has said it's prepared to ship as many as 500 million COVID tests. How's the launch going so far? How have orders been in the last few days?
Yeah, Savannah, it's pretty simple. You just go to the website, put in your information, click send, and it's going very well. Hundreds of thousands of orders already placed. The government says that individuals should expect to receive those within 7 to 12 business days, Savannah. And the really significant departure here that this signifies is this is the federal government for the first time really leveraging its bulk purchasing powers on behalf of the American people. Now, when I spoke exclusively with the White House testing coordinator, he said that the American people should use these free tests for 3 specific purposes. Number 1, if you have COVID symptoms, obviously. Number 2, if you know that you've been exposed to COVID, wait 5 days and then take the test. Or number 3, if you're going to be in a closed setting with someone who you know has high risk conditions. Those are the 3 circumstances under which you should be using these free tests.
Great reminders there, because I do think we're at the point where it's confusing about when you're supposed to use it, when you have to quarantine, that type of thing. And those can be ordered from covidtests.gov, by the way. Now, the Biden administration had come under fire for a shortage in these tests. I mean, I experienced this mess firsthand, wandering from pharmacy to pharmacy to try to get an at-home test. We're seeing those long lines that can be hours long. So you just mentioned the importance of a tool like testing during this surge. What is the White House saying about sustaining this program and their hope for it?
Yeah, we heard the president himself, Savannah, when we saw those images of those long lines. You can see there people waiting just to get a rapid test. And he said he wished that he had done this earlier. When I spoke to the testing coordinator, he said this is not just about getting us over the hump of Omicron. This is a longer-term strategy and marking a longer-term presence of the federal government in managing COVID as something that we're just going to have to live with for a while. Take a listen.
So these tests will help us with Omicron, but they will also help us in the period of time beyond Omicron. We're going to need to have testing capacity for the long run, and this program will help people meet their testing needs, meet community testing needs for the long term.
And another thing, Savannah, is that they say that a lot of these tests that are due to expire in March that are already on the market, they're working with manufacturers to extend those expiration deadlines.
And Heidi, quickly before I let you go, I mentioned that PPE deployment. NBC News has learned they're making this big push on masks. What can you tell us?
Yeah, Savannah, the largest purchase of PPE in U.S. history on behalf, again, of the federal government. These masks, they say, will start to be shipped out by the end of this week. They're going to be distributed the same places where you get your vaccine shots, where you get your tests, at pharmacies, at local community centers. And they say that there will be substantial supply. Take a listen.
This program that is being announced is to provide hundreds of millions of N95 masks to Americans around the country. There's going to be a substantial supply of N95 masks made available, so I think we feel confident that people who want to access them will be able to access them.
So these masks, Savannah, are for everyone. They're not for priority groups, although they're hoping that many of the elderly who are most at risk will get to the front of the line. Savannah?
Absolutely. All right, Heidi Prisbella, thank you so much. Coming up on the front line, healthcare workers reflecting on a difficult 2 years on the job.
Despite internal frustrations, fatigue, whatever we may be feeling, you always try to make sure that your empathy is there first and foremost.
Up next, their personal perspective on the fight against COVID.
Plus, researchers find a link, an actual link between politics and poor health. That's in our weekly checkup. Next on Morning News Now. The ASPCA has a new home of sorts for dogs up for adoption in New York City. The organization recently unveiled its Real Life Room, a space that gives dogs a break from the stresses sometimes seen in animal shelters. The room is decorated to resemble a home environment so the dogs up for adoption can prepare for their life in a new setting. The space, which opened right before the holidays, is intended for dogs that need some form of medical and behavioral support before they're adopted. It was actually decorated by Dana Isom Johnson, who's a judge on the NBC series Making It, and we certainly hope the room helps all those dogs out there find their right owner. What a good idea.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, can you imagine the differences in that? I mean, having adopted a dog, I know that it's a totally new environment. They're confused, sort of, but it's so nice, especially when you know what they're probably going through just in their section and
Exactly. Unless then maybe though the dogs will get home and be like, well, this couch isn't as nice as the one I just had.
Yeah, that's true.
It'll be good.
All right. Now, 2 years ago, New York City became the nation's biggest COVID hotspot. It forced millions into lockdown as cases and hospitalizations surged. Healthcare workers quickly became the heroes of New York City, showing up to take care of patients at great personal risk. Now those workers are reflecting on the toll the pandemic has taken and why they continue to work despite the burnout.
It started off on pure adrenaline.
So many tears have been shed, and experts tell us there will be many more tears to follow.
Extremely fearful, not knowing what exactly I would find when I would step foot into the hospital behind me.
Another 2,000 lives lost nationally since yesterday as this wildfire of misery rapidly burns across the country.
No matter what we did, no matter what resources we used, what skills we used, what knowledge we used, we were likely not to save those patients, and that was gut-wrenching.
The overwhelming sense of burnout, people were openly expressing it in the past, and a lot of what we're seeing now, it's being internalized. So it doesn't mean it's not there. You know, people are tired, whether it's mentally, whether it's physically, but people are quiet.
Every shift feels even more exhausting than the previous one. And I wish I could sit here now, stand here and tell you when I predict this will all be over, because it still feels like we are a long ways away from the end.
Most nurses will work 12 hours in the emergency setting, but we're doing far more than that because we get sick too. I've heard a lot of talk of Governor Hochul sending additional personnel to help some of the hospitals. And that's the one thing that if I could ask for anything, that's what I would ask for. Small hospitals like us, we're an independent hospital. We're not part of the big networks. We don't have the resources or funds. If there is that ability to send extra personnel, then that would be welcomed because we really need it.
It's the Great Resignation hitting the healthcare industry at the worst possible time. Nearly 1 in 5 healthcare workers have quit their job during the pandemic.
With the exodus, it was really sad to see some people go. We had some really great clinicians.
I stayed because it's a labor of love.
I stayed for a lot of reasons, but I really feel like this is my calling, and I love to do what I do.
I feel almost a calling in society to stay in the fight, because it really still feels like a war.
The 80% of the patients that we have in the hospital are unvaccinated.
There's a lot of frustration around that. But at the same time, despite internal frustrations, fatigue, whatever we may be feeling, you always try to make sure that your empathy is there first and foremost.
We might have something going on in our lives, but somebody out there is having a worse day.
I'm still tired, and I'm still fatigued, and trying to stay optimistic about still where we're headed. Because given how far we've become and still yet how far we have to go, I can't quit now.
And from all of us here at NBC News Now, we want to say a special thank you to all the healthcare workers for all you've done throughout the pandemic and all you continue to do. As we said, you are truly heroes.
You're here to that. All right, it's time now for your weekly checkup. NBC News senior medical correspondent Dr. John Torres joins us now to discuss the latest health headlines you might have missed. Dr. Torres, good morning to you. So here's one that's making some headlines. So if politics has ever made you feel Let me try that again. I'm worked up by it. If politics has ever made you feel sick, you're not alone. Our first study looks at the health impacts, literal health impacts of politics. What can you tell us?
And, you know, I think politics makes all of us sick from time to time. But what this survey is showing at the University of Nebraska is that for some people, it's actually impacting their life. And what they found out in their survey, which they took in 2017 and again in 2020, is that 40% of Americans said that politics were causing a huge amount of stress in their life. And a third of Americans actually said it was going even beyond that it was causing them to have fatigue, feelings of anger, this loss of temper, and it was triggering some compulsive behaviors in them that they didn't have if they weren't looking at the politics politics. So what are the doctor's orders? Well, the doctor's orders are essentially take a bit of a step back. Go ahead and take some time for yourself to enjoy the things that make you happy. Turn off some of that media, especially the social media, if you're focusing on that day after day. And if it tends to be affecting your life, especially your daily activities, seek help, because for some people it can push them to that area. So you want to make sure that you're okay. And it's okay to step back, Joe. It's okay not to look at politics once in a while.
Yeah.
Good advice.
Yeah, great advice. And keeping in mind things like your family, people you love, how important that is, and to not let that get in the way. All right, Doctor, I have one for you about sleep. So we know how important it is, and we've heard so much that we feel great after a good night's sleep, that it helps you. But it's interesting when we hear some of the really specific benefits of that good night of sleep. So researchers are saying it could help you with face and name recognition. What more can you tell us about this study?
And Savannah, if you're like me, I am great at remembering faces. I'm not as good at remembering names, and I'm certainly not as good as matching those names to faces. But what this survey or this study found is a very small study, 24 people, 18 to 31-year-olds. But what they found is if they started doing something in their sleep, they were able to remember names and faces together. And what they ended up doing is in what they call phase 3 sleep, which is right before you go into REM, they were getting the name whispered to them of the person they remembered seeing right before they went to sleep. And after they woke up, they were better able to place the correct name with the face when that sleep wasn't disturbed and they heard that name time after time. So what can you do? Well, if you can have somebody when you get to that part of sleep, and we're talking about 30 minutes into a nap, whisper the name to you, that could certainly help. But on top of that, if you're not sleeping well, that's going to impact your memory, and that's going to impact that recognition. So find out why you're not sleeping well. Is it sleep apnea? Are there other sleep issues? Get to the cause of that. And if you're feeling forgetful, try some other memory techniques, mnemonics, or different things you can to remember names and faces in particular, Savannah.
Good advice there,
These
too.
two sleep-deprived anchors would like to say, Dr. Smith, thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Torres.
Thank you.
Coming up, Peloton's wild ride. Sales for the company's exercise bike and treadmill are slowing.
Yeah, when we return, the challenges ahead for the company amid recalls, scandals, and people heading back to the gym. That's next. Welcome back. After 5 years, Puerto Rico's bankruptcy fight may be coming to an end. A federal judge has signed off on a plan that would restructure and cut the island's outstanding debt by 80%, saving more than $50 billion. It's the largest municipal debt restructuring deal in U.S. history, and it would allow the island to pay the outstanding $7.4 billion to creditors. Puerto Rico filed for bankruptcy back in 2017, 2 years after government officials said they couldn't afford to pay back billions in debt.
Time for our CNBC Money Minute, the biggest financial headlines of the day and why they matter to you.
Silvana Henao is with us this morning. Hey, Silvana, good morning.
Hey, guys, good morning. YouTube is dropping efforts to create original programming and will focus instead on creators who fill the platform with content. YouTube will invest in live shopping programs, its Black Voices Fund, and YouTube Shorts, its answer to TikTok. YouTube Originals started in 2016 as Netflix was adding tons of subscribers. Its biggest show, Cobra Kai, which aired for 2 seasons before moving to Netflix. Snapchat will be rolling out new parental controls soon. These include options to limit friend suggestions for teen users so strangers won't easily find their accounts. Snapchat will no longer show accounts for 13 to 17-year-olds as suggestions to others unless they have a certain number of friends in common. BJ's Wholesale Club is taking its credit card business elsewhere. The Wall Street Journal reports the members-only retail club is moving its co-branded cards to Capital One. It's a big blow to Alliance Data Systems, which specializes in store credit cards. BJ's has been among its most prized partnerships with roughly $1.5 billion in credit card balances. More than 1 million BJ's members have one of the cards. Guys, back to you.
All right, Silvana, thanks so much.
Thank you.
You got it.
It was hard to escape Peloton at the start of the pandemic. The company seemed to dominate the at-home gym experience. But as more people return to the actual gym, Peloton sales are quickly slowing down. NBC News Now correspondent Priscilla Thompson has more.
Peloton, one of the fastest selling items at the start of the pandemic, is now facing a new reality as people around the globe return to normal workout routines.
Peloton sales, they are surging as people look to work out at home while gyms, as we all know, are closed. And that is sending the stock a lot higher.
But not anymore. The exercise brand stock hit a 52-week low this week, closing Tuesday around $30 a share. This after the stock tumbled 76% last year. CNBC reporting the stationary bike maker is now bringing in consulting company McKinsey & Co. to help cut costs. The hard times not surprising to some users who got in early.
There was kind of a boom for the Peloton right during the pandemic. So I think it was only a matter of time before things started to kind of settle downwards a little bit.
In recordings of a company call obtained by CNBC, Peloton's management team can be heard considering cutting its apparel division, asking store employees to take customer service calls, and potentially closing up to 15 of its more than 120 showrooms around the world. Neither Peloton nor McKinsey responded to NBC's request for comment. Peloton now saying it likely won't see actual profits until 2023.
What is going on with Peloton right now?
There aren't that many people now that are creating home gyms anymore. Right now, you have the option to go to a variety of different boutique fitness places, as well as just your traditional gym that was down the street that used to be closed.
The roller coaster 2 years started after the company IPO'd towards the end of 2019. The stock plunged after a controversial holiday ad went viral.
It's the infamous ad that got everyone all spun up. A husband gives his already thin wife a Peloton exercise bike as a gift.
But it was nothing like what would come. Peloton saw a surge in popularity at the height of the pandemic, more than quadrupling its sales in the past 2 years. The stock reaching an all-time high of more than $160 a share in January of last year. Then came the setbacks.
Now the company is announcing a voluntary recall of its Tread and Tread Plus treadmills.
The company was forced to recall treadmills in May after one child died and dozens more were injured from being pulled under the treadmills. Stocks took another plunge in December when Mr. Big, a main character in the Sex and the City reboot, had a fatal heart attack after a Peloton ride on the show.
John!
Peloton was quick to clap back with an ad showing Christopher Noth alive and well.
And just like that, the world was reminded that regular cycling stimulates and improves your heart, lungs, and circulation.
The commercial went viral, but it backfired. The ad was pulled less than a week later amid sexual assault allegations made against Noth, which he denies. Now, new signs of trouble for the company that saw its lowest subscriber gains in roughly 2 years last summer.
Starting at the end of the month, the company's going to make you pay $250 for delivery and setup for its bike and an extra $350 for its treadmill.
The company blaming inflation and higher supply chain costs for the price hike. Current subscribers say they'll also be on the lookout for changes.
Getting rid of any beloved instructors altogether, I think, would definitely not make people happy.
Our thanks to Priscilla Thompson for that report. Coming up, where's the beef? Or the chicken? More fast food chains adding meatless to their menus.
Yeah, when we return, how the demand for plant-based options is changing the way Americans eat. You're watching Morning News Now.
It's currently Veganuary. That's like dry January, but you're cutting out animal products rather than alcohol. Well, people going vegan for the month have more options than ever before, with some of the biggest names in fast casual dining adding plant-based options to their menus.
Yeah, it's because of that and also these vegan exclusive restaurants that are popping up more than ever before. Here's a look at the trend and my conversation with one New York City business owner who honestly did convince me that a vegan fried chicken sandwich can be just as good as the real thing.
Hi.
Are you Nicole?
I'm Nicole.
Nice to meet you.
Nicole Marquis' journey in vegan fast casual food started a decade ago.
We started Hip City Veg, the first one in Center City, Philadelphia in 2012.
That feels a little ahead of the curve.
Yeah.
Was it at the time?
It definitely was. At the time, people thought of vegan food as, you know, grains and sprouts and not tasting very good or radical, but now people are excited about plant-based foods.
And now what started with a single location in Philly is making its mark on several major cities.
We then, in 2016, opened our first location in Washington, D.C. We're in Chinatown and DuPont, and then just 2 months ago, we opened in the greatest city in America, New York.
Vegan food, once considered a niche trend, is growing into a mainstream phenomenon.
Why do you think veganism is growing in popularity right now?
We have a greater attention and awareness on our health and on our family's health, especially through this entire challenging past 2 years where health is at the top of our minds. I also think that it's really hit home for many people that the environment is in a real crisis.
And it's not just happening at smaller, fast casual restaurants. Vegan options are making their way onto nationwide big fast food chain menus.
Huge name brands are adding vegan alternatives to some of their most popular food items. This month, Chipotle launched their new plant-based chorizo, adding another meatless option on top of their already popular vegan sofritas.
It's a trend that we've been tracking for years now. There's been crazy growth. We predict that that growth is going to continue. There's all kinds of new options popping up all the time.
Just last week, KFC releasing their Beyond Chicken Nuggets.
Get this, Google searches for vegan food near me increased by about 5,000% over the last year.
With the pandemic, we also saw a renewed focus on health. So people are always interested in health and diet and eating in a way that's best for us. And people overwhelmingly believe that plant-based eating is better for our health than animal-based foods. As far as are these items healthier, I think also fried chicken is fried chicken.
And the vegan explosion coming for the American appetite.
I think I have to give it a try if I'm here, right?
So this is the BFG, blended fruits and greens.
So this is beans and grains, basically.
Beans and grains. What we know about Americans is that we love our juicy burgers, our crispy chicken.
Guilty.
Yep, our creamy shakes. And if we know that we can have food that's satisfying and have it be plant-based, I think people are thrilled when they figure that out.
Now, according to a recent study, less than 6% of Americans say they're vegetarian. However, 1 in 4 people say they're trying to eat less meat in some way, whether that means eating only plant-based meals or simply starting meatless Mondays. And that number may increase as more big-name stores add meat alternatives to their menus, because a big part of that is having that easy access to these vegan options to give it a shot. So, what do you think? Would you try it?
I'll give it a shot. Sure. Yeah. Not long term, probably for me, but maybe I would be convinced.
You should try that chicken sandwich.
Absolutely. I would be willing to do that.
I'll take you.
All right.
Okay.
Sounds good. All right. That does it for this hour of morning news now.
But the news continues right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.